Basically, what's the best way to put this? I'm starting to get the mod development bug again. Um, um, everything's bugging. Right, so I'm starting to get the mod development bug again. Now, where I actually started doing like modding and all that sort of stuff, it was actually all the way back in, God, what was the first game I modded? Commodore 64 games, I think, because like you actually had to get a book and write the code into the Commodore 64. Like not like a password to get it to launch. Like I'm saying actually write the code into the game, like create a pet basic script to make a game. And like that was probably the first time I ever modded a game. But after then, probably the first game that I ever modded was would have been Duke Nukem 3D and Command and Conquer Red Alert, and before then probably Command and Conquer. Definitely Red Alert. Command and Conquer Red Alert and Doom, like build engine. So that's like Blood, um, Duke Nukem, Hexen. I used to do quite a bit of modding. Anyway, so that's where I started off with it. And it was always like just about like opening up the files of the game, try and figure out like what those files would do. Unfortunately now the games they don't have that level of transparency. And there's no such thing as like an official mod kit for many modern games, except for the only really example that I can think of that's not that is Armor. Armored Assault, like Armor 3, Armor 2. Those were highly moddable. But say Battlefield. Battlefield was probably my first serious modding project. I started that one back in 2004 and I was modding it till 2006. 3 years straight. Probably more than that. Probably modding it up until when I started modding Morrowind of all games. But I'm starting to get the bug again. And I've been looking at all the like the game files for Battlefield 2042 and I'm like, hey, they use CAS files now. It's still in like relatively the same structure. Why don't they have the same mod tools and such that they used to have when you were modding games? And it got me to thinking, I actually really feel like recreating the mods that I made for Battlefield 42. Now, one of the biggest problems is that a lot of the mods that are made for Battlefield 1942 were never actually released online. And also, basically, in the 20 years or so it's been since then, nearly 20 years, I've lost hard drives. A lot of this stuff was actually transferred and backed up on CDs. And we all know exactly how good the longevity of a CD is over time. All the paint just peels off it and you can't actually read it anymore. So I actually put thousands of hours into making Battlefield 1942. And I did it in a couple of different ways. I made realism mods, kind of like Project Reality sort of stuff, like screwing with shaders, screwing with the original weapons of the game, make everything um like making like 4 or 5 different variants of like the Panzerkampfwagen 4, PZ4 for the uninitiated, Panzer 4. Just to give you an idea, like so all your different variants, you got H, you got J, you got your E. I think it stands for E. There's so many different models anyway. So like making different versions of tanks and like having them spawn, so getting them to spawn on the maps and getting it so that you could change the spawn positions of where they'll be and stuff. So the maps will play out different. And basically, I went on from that to make a total conversion for 1942, which was actually completely different because I stripped out every vehicle in the game, every weapon in the game, every plane in the game, and I replaced it with stuff that was inspired from Total Annihilation. It's a real-time strategy game, which I still reckon is a hell of a lot better than StarCraft. Led to Supreme Commander, which is the spiritual successor. And so I actually made a Total Annihilation themed total conversion mod for Battlefield 1942 that never got released. It had fighters, it had scout aircraft, it had bombers, it had tanks, it had amphibious tanks. The only thing it didn't have is walkers, and all of the infantry weapons were done on a Total Annihilation flavor. So on one side you had the Allies, who I basically made ARM, and you had the Axis, who are made core. Then they had different weapons on the side as well. And you could basically go through and say you're an engineer, you could pop down a building and it would pop up, and then that could be like a light laser tower, or it could be like a vehicle spawning pad for an aircraft, like an actual vehicle spawning pad, repair pad with an ammo station on it, with an aircraft attached to it, that anyone who spawned into the game could then spawn into and then take off. Just like later Battlefield games, like where they made it so you can spawn into vehicles after they've actually entered the map. Or like when you spawn into the vehicle, it actually spawns. Right, I did that shit when, like back in Battlefield 1942. So I've been thinking, do I have enough time now to go through and recreate some of the shit that I made that I've lost over the years? Could I still do it with a reasonable time frame? Just for kicks. And like to do it while I'm streaming. So like while I'm modding it, actually stream me as I'm modding it and like making it. I'm thinking I might be able to do it again, but it's going to take quite a huge investment in hours. Like a massive investment. And basically what I'm putting this video up for is like saying, hey guys, like for the odd couple of people who do pop in every now and then, like what would you think if I did actually did that as a stream? And there are some other considerations to take into it. So like back in the old day, like comparison to 3D modeling tools for Battlefield modding, right? You had BF Mesh View, file format. Like whenever you made any change inside the game, you had to extract all of the files out of the files that were stored in directories, recompress them, and put them back in the directory in order to change the clip count, like the magazine count of a rifle from 31 to 1. Right, so like just make one little change every single time. You had to extract everything, make the change, recompress it, put it back in the game, load the game, test it to see if it worked. And like a lot of that was trial and error because like a lot of us didn't really know how it worked. And like we had to test and retest and test and test and retest. Last time I did that was Battle Station Specific, where a lot of the modders afterwards took the work that I created and they used it to make their own mods, and they ended up reverse engineering the game engine, and all before you know it they could put in new 3D models and everything, which is something that I was never able to do. But like what I did was like edit the files to do it. But I'm tempted to go back into Battlefield 1942 and recreate some of the mods that I made because like I miss the nostalgia of it. And but there's a couple of little problems. Say for instance you made a tank. In order to get a tank working, you had to have a very the 3D object files, 3D model files in Battlefield 1942 were a proprietary format. They weren't exactly easy to work with. There was a mix between Gmax, which is like the really old version of 3ds Max, and like a mix of that between work with that and 3ds Max 4. Later 3ds Max 5. I used 3ds 4. But you can't obtain student licenses for these anymore. Like the applications don't exist, and like 3ds Max 2021 don't have like backwards compatibility with the old like files that you need to actually be able to use it with. So like I had my old student account, which I used because I was at university at the time when I was doing it. So I did have student access. So you get your student access, you need 3ds Max, you need Photoshop or GIMP at the very, very minimum. You have to be able to create photo files and layers, textures. But yeah, like when it comes to all the 3ds Max stuff, it's like a UVW, unwrap meshes and shit, which is like where you are basically taking a 3D model of an item, it might be a tank or a plane, and unwrapping it to lay flat on a file so you can paint textures over it. And like depending on how you do it, you can get different types of reflections and smoothing, all sorts of different stuff. Not to mention back in like 1942 days, like the effect file used images. So like missile trails or like repeated kind of like repeated sprites, if anything. Like say like a bazooka trail was like a little mushroom sort of effect that was repeating every 20 times a second, and that would give the trail of what was behind the file and all. But I made lots of crazy stuff when I was, and like I'm kind of getting nostalgic to the point where I'm thinking it might be time to redo it all because I've got nothing better to do. It might be time to redo it all, but while I'm actually streaming. Like when I originally did all this stuff, I didn't even have access to the internet, so I was modding Battlefield 1942 virtually blind. And the only access to the internet that I had was through the university, and that allowed me to download all things like the different plugins, like God, what have we got? Like the 3ds Max tool, all that sort of shit, and like this stuff, all this stuff. Like this is a 3ds Max 2009 32-bit tools. So I don't even know how many of these applications I can still run. I never tried it with Maya. I did do a bit with Gmax, and I think that when I was doing some scripts, I required Gmax in order to do some things. I don't remember exactly what they were, but I needed it. And like being able to export, famously impossible to export from Gmax. So I had to use a workaround to get Gmax, export them into work. Milkshake 3D, oh my god. Don't even get me started. Blender, fuck off. Blender sucks. If you've ever used 3ds Max and you know how to use 3ds Max, trying to use Blender turns your head upside down. Everything in Blender is different. Like there's no lock on vertices. There's the way it works is completely different. I can actually 3D model in 3ds Max using a keyboard. I don't even need Wings 3D. Barely remember. SketchUp, never heard of it. I started off all my 3D modeling using Rhino 3D, surprisingly. I was using Rhinoceros NURBS model, making total on started reading about. But anyway, I just wanted to run this past you guys and see what you thought. Maybe I'll get a response. If someone says go for it, go, I'll start making the mods that I made again. I'll recreate them, even though it took me thousands and thousands of work. Like the ground steps, like I can vaguely remember how I did everything, so I can redo it. But obviously, it's going to be working with very old technology, playing a game that basically no one plays anymore. I'll never be able to get anyone on servers, but who knows? Maybe I can get the work back out there finally. Yeah, and I suppose as an end to the video, I'd just like to say I really wish that Battlefield 2042, even though it released with sort of like an editor, which is in Portal, I really wish it released with an actual mod toolkit like Arma does, like Battlefield 1942 does. I think that's, I think this is the point where, especially because of the critical failures that's experienced, I think this is the point where, EA Games and DICE need to step back and go, hey guys, let our community have some fun, let the modders do something. But yeah, like that's what I'm thinking, because like of where it's gone, I think like modding again might become again a possibility. Especially with the way that they've gone with Portal, it's like maybe they're fucking actually trying to support their fans and people have been playing the game for 20 and like to mod it. Who knows where we might go. Anyway, just throwing these thoughts up in the air, and I'll talk to you guys again later. I've got more YouTube to watch and I've got food. I might jump on later to stream. Anyway, peace out.